Hello and welcome to the Kubernetes 124 visual release notes. The release notes so visual you can almost smell them. Let's start out with a few little stats about the release. This release brings 46 enhancements on par with the 45 in Kubernetes 123. Of these 46 new enhancements, there are only 13 that are graduating to stable, and 14 are existing features that have seen a lot of improvement. And then we're followed up with the last 12 that are completely new, and then 6 to round that out that are deprecated or removed features. Although, again, there are a few discrepancies in reporting here. You would think that this is not that hard of a thing, but it turns out really difficult to track on such a massive open source project. So I'm just going with the generally consensus amount of numbers and not the ones I counted on the sheet myself. Now, would you like more stats about unique contributors or the number of commits? Please let me know if you'd like those, if those are interesting and you'd like to see those in these videos. Let's start with the deprecations like usual, and really the most important parts probably. Actually, let's do something a little bit different. Hang with me. There are two really big bits of news, and then we'll go back to our standard format. Instead of deprecations, let's do really the most important things right now. It's hopefully not a surprise that this first one is that of the Docker shim. But if that does come to you as a surprise, you should be watching my visual release notes every single release. Just do it and let your friends know they never have to be surprised by a Kubernetes feature deprecation or removal again. So do your friends a favor and let them know where they can watch the highlights of Kubernetes releases. Now, before you panic, don't worry. It's not that big of a deal. But because I'm a nice person, I have included documentation on how you might update your cluster. Though I suspect many of you working in cloud providers or with a managed Kubernetes services probably don't really have anything to do or to really even worry about. Your service provider should take care of it for you, and they'll probably have their own documentation on what to do if there is something that you need to do. But yeah, in 124, they decided to go ahead and rip it out. Really, I have always said the very least painful way is usually the way that causes you the most pain right now. And it's really a good thing. Remember, in the end, this does not mean that Containerd, the container engine that powers Docker, doesn't work anymore. It just means that Kubernetes itself is now strictly sticking to its defined interface. And Containerd, the container engine that powers Docker, does in fact support the OCI interface. And again, this is not really that big of a deal. This should speed up development and alleviate stress on the Kubernetes developers and, maybe more importantly, reduce bugs. Why? It simplifies the container runtime stack in Kubernetes. Simpler is almost always better. Fewer errors, mistakes, and security issues for the developers to work on. Okay, the last big one, 2 out of 2, one that has been a quandary for many years now. And now it's been fixed. Beta APIs are now off by default. That's right, you heard it here first. The Kubernetes team has finally realized that what it means to be beta. This has always been an odd feature of Kubernetes, and most would say that its original intent was for early adoption of features. Thankfully, the Kubernetes community has seen the light, and by that I mean that they realize that flying by the seat of their pants in production is not always the best strategy. This means moving forward that beta will be beta and will be opt-in or off by default. Anytime there was a bug in a beta API, it meant that most Kubernetes clusters had it enabled by default. This was not really great. And now this reign of terror is over, and we can rest assured knowing only stable things are enabled by default moving forward. Gosh, that was like 10 years in the making. Do you know what makes me really angry about this though? I made an entire video explaining the quirks of Kubernetes release and versioning here to help people navigate this with the release notes. What do I do now? Do I re-record it? Do I leave it? What do I do, Kubernetes? Did I say 2 important things? I really meant 3 things. Though it's not as much a new feature, although security should be a feature, so I'm calling it a new feature. Anyhow, signing of the release artifacts by cosign is now a thing. Package signing and securing your pipeline is something we have talked quite a bit about on this channel. If you don't know what that is, let me know and I'll make a video on securing your supply chain. But cosign, in short, tries to help secure your supply chain by ensuring you can prove who made the artifacts. This is not everything that you need to secure your complete pipeline, but it is a really good first step. Let's move on to our deprecations. There were more than I expected, to be honest. Here is a list of everything. This covers everything from the in-tree CSI provisioner to CSI driver migration to the removal of the dynamic log sanitization. There were a lot of them, but I really just wanted to hit the big ones because I thought it would be the most effective use of people's times. Most were really minor, but you should look over the list yourself and ensure that it's not something you are currently using and relying on. First big one. The dynamic kubelet config has been removed in 1.24. This has been a long time in coming, and I personally never really found it to work that well. That being said, I honestly think things like this are really, really good. Removing this will make the codebase simpler, and that is good. The only other big deprecation that I came across is probably one you're not using, but the dynamic log sanitization that was added in 1.20 as alpha is now getting removed. This feature was a way to keep sensitive information from being logged. But it turns out there's a better way, and it existed via the static analysis method that went GA in 1.23. If you don't know what I'm talking about here, go ahead and check out my video release notes on that if you want to know more. I want to take a quick second to encourage this exact behavior. They had an idea. They thought it might solve an issue better than a currently supported method, and they tried it in a way that would not affect anyone other than the people that actually wanted to give it a try. This is super cool, and I hope to encourage the Kubernetes community to continue to support this type of experimentation, as it's really important to let people try things out, learn and understand how they work. And that is really it of anything of notice. But go ahead and don't take my word for it. Check out the links in the description below to the deprecations. All the links to this content are in the description of the video. I recommend you check them out and see what the developers thought about when they wanted to remove these different features, as well as how to migrate from some of them. But do remember, there will be no migration guides for things that are in alpha. So if it was in alpha, hopefully you were not depending on it in production. Talk about being brave. There are a lot more deprecations, though I don't know if any of them were as big of impact as the ones we already talked about. There is more work being done in Clog to try and make a real logging library. If they keep working on it, here soon they might accidentally implement Logger. I know, I bring this up a lot, but sometimes it takes a lot of foresight and understanding to get yourself to actually force yourself to work with something generic. It always sounds nice to have something that is specialized just for you. But then you own that entire stack when really, you want to orchestrate containers, not worry about writing logs. So this is just something I harp about because it's something that is important. Understanding what you want to do and making sure that that's what you're doing. All right, enough time on deprecations. Yeah, they're not nearly as fun as new shiny things, right? I mean, like, nobody even uses Docker anymore, right? Let's start by talking about Statefulsets and the new resource, Max Unavailable. This is going to bring quite a bit of benefit to anyone looking to support stateful sets in Kubernetes. There are many reasons to use a stateful set, mostly for stateful applications like database. I don't know why I said many. There is one reason to use a stateful set, and that is for stateful applications. But up until now, it's been very difficult to control how many pods in a stateful set were deleted and recreated at a single time. Until now, that is. While it's still only in alpha, meaning it's not something you are going to use for a little while, It's something to watch for if you are using stateful sets, meaning this feature is going to let you roll out updates or restarts when needed with the safety, ensuring only a small set number are unavailable while it happens. Prior to this, I have seen this type of logic be designated to an operator controlling the stateful sets. But this is a whole lot of overhead to have an operator if this is all you needed or wanted. So I'm pretty excited about this, and I'm pretty excited to see the continued expanding of Kubernetes stateful applications. I mean, what's better than managing state in Kubernetes? I'm serious. It's awesome. The project is maturing as a whole. Last but not least in this list for stateful sets would be the non-graceful node shutdown. This probably, I said probably, but really only affects people who are trying to run stateful applications on Kubernetes using stateful sets. This is only an alpha, not prime time yet, but this is going to be absolutely huge for anyone running stateful sets. Thing is, before this, if a node crashed or shut down in a not clean way, a stateful set would just remain in terminating and their volume attachments would be stuck to the failed node. This feature is going to allow you to delete the things and force its deletion from the cluster so that it can be scheduled on a brand new node. This works by having a new taint with the label out of service that a user can apply to the failed node. This is absolutely spectacular, and guess what? Your operator, if you have one, can still use this to help facilitate the removing from the cluster. All right, let's talk about changes to nodes. There is really nothing new here, just some improvements on things previously introduced. Of these, my favorite by far is the gRPC probes released in 1.23. And this is bringing support to gRPC to the liveness probe that was released in, I don't remember, but it was a while ago. I'm gonna guess 1.15. Anyhow, this just means that you can just use gRPC for your entire stack, and that's really, really nice. The other notable mention around the nodes would have to be the kubelet credential provider. This is kind of a big deal, but it's also kind of not a big deal. I don't see it affecting many people in the end. The kubelet had to support many, many ways to connect and pull images, from ECR to Docker Hub to GCR, etc. And in the end, they needed to bring this out of tree so that people could provide their own implementations, and it wasn't pull requests directly to Kubernetes for every single new one. This initial building it inside of Kubernetes and then later painfully ripping it out of Kubernetes is kind of the standard practice. It has its pros and cons. Generally, it lets them work faster for the initial implementations, and that's traded off for some extra work when they plan to just rip it out. While this is cool and shows the project is maturing in how it communicates with container runtimes, it really should not have any effect on you at all, other than if you're creating your own container registry that has its own credential provider. Let's move on and talk about jobs and CronJobs. To be honest, I don't understand this first one. The first enhancement is all about adding time zones to CronJobs. So I spent some time reading the KEP, and I don't understand. I don't understand the desire, the thought. I don't understand. But let me explain it to you, and then you can tell me in the comments how I'm wrong, and this is the best thing to hit Kubernetes since kubectl debug. This feature lets the cronjob resource, with its delayed request, support time zones. Meaning that if you have a cron job, you can now make it respect different time zones from that of the controller manager. Previously to this, the cron job always just ran in the time zone of the controller manager. Now my question here is this: why? The only thing I thought of, and this idea actually scares me a little, is Kubernetes requires everything to be on the same network, no natting. Most likely, this means it's in the same time zone. Unless you're doing something with a private network link or Istio to bridge networks over and across regions. Anyhow, I dug further into the KEP, and they said the motivation was because someone asked for it. This is not an entirely good reason in my personal opinion, but the person who asked has two interesting points. If you click on the link down below, they state that they have some jobs that run based on external entities. This is interesting and something I had not entirely thought about, as I generally don't create cron jobs based on external things. I'm not going to say that I understand their architecture exactly on how everything in their system works, as honestly, this almost sounds like it would be something better suited to a workflow runner like Argo. I honestly think Argo sounds like what they should be using and not a cron job. But again, I don't know what their architecture is. But their second point that I think is valid. Cron supports this. And as this is a cron job, it makes sense for it to support it as well. And so now, using the powers that were vested in Kubernetes in Go version 1.15, it now supports time zones. So go for it. This is supported in a new field called time zone. And there you have it. Let me know if you have a better idea on this and what's important about it and how we could leverage it usefully. I really still am struggling, even though I'll acquiesce that it should support it based off of cron supporting it. Next. In Kubernetes 121, we talked about index job. This feature makes it easier to have highly parallel jobs running. This is now graduating to stable and is now enabled by default, and so you should go out and start using it. If you need help with what it is exactly, go back and check my last release videos on 121 and see how it could apply to you. Along those lines, Track Ready pods from release 123 graduated to beta, and the new field suspend that was added to jobs in 121 graduated to stable. Go check out those videos if you want more information on those and how they could affect you and help you and bring more awesomeness to Kubernetes for you. Moving on from nodes, let's talk about Kubernetes networking. By far, the absolutely most important one of the Kubernetes networking was a new sub-resource has been added to the network policy called status. This is going to help you debug network policies just a little bit better because of how Kubernetes delegates networking to the CNI providers, and it's actually the CNI provider's job to enforce network policies. It can actually become very difficult to debug exactly what's going on. Not only that, some CNIs do it just a slight bit differently, meaning the same network policy or set of policies might not play exactly the same depending on what CNI you are using. This makes debugging it all the worse. So this new status is going to help you debug network policies and help you create zero trust deployments. As I have previously stated, zero trust is so important as the number of attacks on application, APIs, and infrastructure increases. Zero trust is the cornerstone of limiting the blast radius when, in fact, something does happen and go wrong. So start using network policies. Yes, I'm looking at you. Start using them and ensure that you don't trust anyone, anything, or any service. Now, as this is alpha, this is not going to be enabled by default, and you will need to enable it if you want to start using it. But that being said, it is a really cool feature that I'm really looking forward to, and is probably one of the top ones of this release, as I think it's going to really empower people debugging their network policies. All right, another one here in the network section that is also a confirmed alpha feature. This is the ability to reserve service IP ranges for dynamic and static IP allocation. Wow, what does that even mean? Well, if you don't know what a Kubernetes service is, go check out my other videos on them. In Kubernetes, there is a cluster-wide service IP range. What this is going to do is let you set aside some of that cluster-wide range for static IP addresses for services. This reduces your chance of a conflict, but though do be warned, if you chew through all of your dynamic range, the dynamic allocations will continue into your static range. So be warned. Anyhow, it's out and it's in alpha, and if you feel like playing around with it and give it a go ahead and try it. But it's probably best not to use it in production, as it's probably going to have some bugs, and maybe even more importantly, alpha features have just a small chance of changing and breaking in wonderful and mysterious ways. All right, lastly, let's really quickly talk about storage. Really quickly, volume snapshots are now letting you validate your snapshot, and it's now in alpha. On top of that, the ability for your CSI driver to load a sidecar to check your volume health was also added in alpha. Wait a second, that sounds like it's a pretty big deal. Yeah, well, probably. But this was mostly a work started in Kubernetes 1.21, and this is currently just in alpha. Once it moves to beta and gets a little more solidified, I will cover it a little bit more in depth. And the likelihood that they change a little before then, I think, is pretty high. And if you feel like helping shape it by using it, go for it. But in my ever future penetrating eye, it will be a while before that is completely useful. All this feature is going to do is give you a health check for your attached storage. This is actually really powerful and something that's been needed because right now there's no actual way to know if the storage that's attached is actually healthy. And enabling the CSI provider to load a custom sidecar enables it to actually do whatever tests that you need to do. So it's super powerful and I'm super looking forward to it. Storage capacity tracking, on the other hand, a feature initially released in 1.19, is going to graduate to stable, making it hard to schedule pods on nodes that don't have enough storage. And along those lines, the CSI volume expansion is also graduated to stable, letting you resize a persistent volume. On top of this, there are a lot of in-tree CSI driver providers that, as we've talked about with a lot of things, are moving out of tree. And done. That's it. How did I do? Did I miss something you thought was going to be a big deal? Let me know in the comments. There are a lot of notes, and I'm sure I missed something you might find interesting. I recommend you try to make it through them and find your favorite things. And if you find something you think I should have covered, but didn't, leave a comment. Now, if you did not like these release notes and prefer to have new Kubernetes features and bugs surprise you in production, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, stick around, and learn about all the awesome things that are going to bite you in the butt in production.